Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Stick With It. This is a special series for our long haul members in particular, where we're focusing on the long haul EA11 in principle agreement. And today I'm joined by Head of AIPA Legal, Matthew Warburton. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, Andrew, how are you going?
I'm very well, thank you. Generally, I'd sit here and introduce you and get you to explain who you are, but to be honest, people just want your advice, Matt. So please don't think I'm rude, but I think we're just going to dive straight into some of the hot topics to deal with the in-principle
Sure.
agreement and the long-haul agreement in general, and your thoughts on your professional opinions on them more than your thoughts, I guess, Matt. So if you're ready, everyone else at home ready, here we go. So, Matt, an in-principle agreement has been reached, of which you were part of the team with the 3 long-haul negotiators plus your legal staff. That came to COM and we voted on that. So we've accepted an in-principle agreement, was passed by COM. Now that's gone off to drafting. Could you just tell us a little bit what's involved in the actual drafting process, I guess, from your side?
Yeah, well, I mean, COM did approve the in-principle agreement, and, the best way to describe it is the in-principle agreement is 2 pages long, with perhaps, 50 or 60 items. And we've got to, turn that 2-page document into a fully drafted, including amendments, of the enterprise agreement, so the EBA11. So there's a lot of drafting, and basically we allocate each item to either Qantas or to AIPA, and then we do the drafting, and then we send it back, and we get in the room and confirm that everyone is happy with the drafting, and that the drafting gives effect to the in-principle agreement.
And that's every word, comma, if, then, but,
The whole lot.
and the where, right through the agreement. Yeah.
The whole lot. So there is a lot of work, but we're really lucky at AIPA. We have pilots who are, some of them are qualified lawyers. Others are just very good at drafting and know the agreement backwards. So we have pilot volunteers who come in and actually do the bulk of that drafting, and they know the agreement, So, yeah, we're really lucky we have those resources available to us.
And is there much dispute over the words, Matt, at this stage, or as we go through
Oh,
drafting?
look,
We're pretty clear.
I don't think so. I mean, our experience so far, I did the short haul one as well, and our experience so far in long haul is that everyone accepts that agreement's been reached. And so everyone goes into the drafting process in good faith. No one's trying to sort of extract some benefit that wasn't there in the in-principle agreement. So far, so good.
Okay, awesome. So that'll take a period of time, and it's happening as quickly as possible. So when we're happy with the draft, then that'll go to the members for their as part of the information pack, won't it? So there'll be some explanation and the draft.
That's right. So there'll be an access period, and it's important to remember this agreement is actually a Qantas agreement. So Qantas has to do all of the statutory work. So Qantas will release the agreement in full to members. Then there'll be a lot of collateral information. We expect both from Qantas but also from AIPA. We will put out a detailed explanatory document detailing each and every change or amendment to the previous agreement. And members will have that 1-week period where they are able to look at all of the collateral information, look at the EA proper, and then cast their vote after that period is finished.
And that's why we're trying to get as much information out as we can on the points we've agreed on, so that we're giving everyone just as much time as we can to get to understand the change in concepts, aren't we? It's
Absolutely.
tricky, though.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely, there is a little bit, so we haven't, obviously we're halfway through the drafting, but, the in-principle agreement, so some detail will be at the very last moment when the drafting is completed. So we do have some limitations on how much detail we can provide, but AIPA is absolutely committed to providing as much detail as possible, and all of the detail will be provided well in advance of pilots being expected to cast their vote.
And so, Matt, we all get a vote. It's one vote, one person, and it's a simple majority for a yes or no, isn't it? It's 50% plus one vote is for or against.
Correct. 50 plus 1. It's important to note that, in fact, if pilots voted up and it's approved by the Fair Work Commission, then members start getting the first benefits, including the allowance that's payable from the first full pay period after approval. So there are benefits that come directly to pilots as soon as, well, within the first full pay period after it's been approved. So the
Yep.
steps are, vote for it. Then we have it approved, hopefully, by the Fair Work Commission, and then benefits flow to pilots.
So let's spend some time now talking about if that doesn't happen, Matt. So if it's come back as a no vote, which everyone is entitled to a vote, and we fully support your right to your vote. Our job is to educate people. So that's why we're going to now talk about the process that would result from a no vote.
Yeah, look,
So
obviously we had a no vote in short haul. So we have some, history to look at what might happen. But look, ultimately, there's a couple of possible outcomes. The first possible outcome is that we go back into the room with Qantas. We say, well, pilots have voted no. You need to add to the pie effectively.
Yep.
And that Qantas will say, no, we're not adding to the pie. You can slice it however you like, but we're not adding to the pie. And that will go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. There are a couple of options. Agreement might be reached between us and Qantas. I think it's fair to say that Qantas won't move substantively. They will not. They just won't, because first of all, they don't want to pay anymore. But more importantly, they don't want to send a message to all of their work groups that if you vote it down, you'll get more. So they are very reticent to add any substantive improvements in that room. If we can reach agreement, then it may go back out to a second vote. If we can't reach further agreement, then there's a range of options. We can go to the Fair Work Commission and seek conciliation. We can look at, Qantas may look at intractable bargaining declaration, making an application for that. And of course, there's, a campaign and potentially protected industrial action. But it's important to note that you've got to consider what improvements you're going to get as against what's on the table there and the time it takes. So, for example, my experience of conciliation of enterprise bargaining disputes is that there's no real substantive improvements gained through that. The Fair Work Commission will spend a lot of time getting the parties together, but no one's obliged to agree to anything, and they rarely do. What does happen is there's a lot of pressure applied for AIPA, in this case, to agree to certain things. And likewise, there's some pressure applied to Qantas, but invariably, they're not going to deliver huge increases or improvements for pilots. Same with intractable bargaining. We know now, because we've had the network decision, we've had the Cleanaway decision, and we know now that the most likely outcome is that pilots will have to wait 2 years for their pay increase, up to 2 years. And when they get their pay increase, back pay, if there's any back pay, will be very limited. It will be either no back pay or maybe up to 12 months back pay. But you won't get back pay for 2 years, which is the last time that pilots had an increase. So you lose back pay and you wait a long time. And then fundamentally, the Fair Work Commission is always going to take a middle position. They're always going to, I heard Corey use the term, use the sword of Damocles, and the sword of Damocles is giving the pilots a bit and giving Qantas a bit. So you're not going to get the best possible wages outcome through IBD.
Was there much in the comments, Matt, around the network case with reference to saying, we don't want you to just bring your disputes here. We far prefer you to get an agreement rather than come and fill up the commission full of your disputes through IBD? Were the commissioners supportive of the process, or were they pretty critical on employers and employees?
The Fair Work Commissioners who are hearing the matter will never make comments like that because, they're hearing the matter. But Fair Work Commissioners who attend conferences and so on have made it very clear to the parties and to unions that you will always get the best deal over the negotiating table. Don't see the Fair Work Commission as being able to deliver one side or the other the majority of what they want. You will be unhappy with some of the things you have to put up with in an intractable bargaining declaration determination. And you will not get back pay for extended periods. And the pay increases are going to be middle of the road pay increases. Whereas, pilots being members of a strong union where, 90% of the pilots, the relevant pilots, are members of AIPA. That is a strong union with strong bargaining power, which means we're able to extract good pay increases over the negotiating table. And so that is where we're going to get the best deal. And that's from a timing perspective, that's from a money in the contract perspective, and that's in a protecting conditions perspective as well.
Are we able to get any benefit out of flexing our industrial muscle, Matt? The threat of PIA or working to rule. Can we talk a little bit about that threat
Yeah.
or the reality of that, I guess?
Yeah, look, workers since time immemorial have, engaged in, over the last 125 years, industrial action to further their wages and conditions. But what you've got to always take into account is the risk that's associated with that sort of action. And that's not to say that you wouldn't ever take it. You may well decide that you need to take it, but there's great risks that follow with that. The most obvious risk is that we have to have a ballot to approve industrial action, and this is a risk that could crystallise straight away. So pilots decide, it would never be AIPA, it's pilots decide that they might want to engage in protected industrial action. Then we have to seek a ballot from the Fair Work Commission or an order, and then a ballot of pilots is taken. Now, if anything less than 80% or 90% of pilots vote for that industrial action, then our bargaining power just disappears straight away. And so you're left going back to Qantas with your tail between your legs, because they know that this industrial action that you've been threatening is not going to eventuate, or if it does eventuate, won't be very effective. And so straight away you've got this risk associated with, saying and taking steps to actually engage in protected industrial action. The other thing generally that I would say is that your bargaining power is very fluid. So you might, just before you take industrial action, think we have a lot of bargaining power here. We're going to engage in industrial action. That's true. Right before you take the industrial action is probably when you have the most bargaining power. But once you've taken it, then you can lose that bargaining power. So, for example, if the Fair Work Commission makes an order to suspend or terminate the industrial action, then what power do we have left? You've used your trick. It's a one-trick pony, right? You've used your trick and it hasn't worked, and the commission has issued an order to suspend or terminate that industrial action. There's something happens in the global economy, and the fuel price goes through the roof, and all the projections are that that's going to continue. All of a sudden, Qantas hardens its position, and it says, we're not going to even engage with you now, or now we're only willing to agree to this pay increase. So bargaining power is fluid, and you've got to at all times make an estimate about the risks of, not just risks of doing the deal, but the risks of not doing the deal.
And of course, there's a cost to us to take industrial action, isn't it? It's not free to the pilots. They will dock us pay if we...
Absolutely. They're actually required to dock your pay. Under the legislation, if pilots engage in protected industrial action, if it's for more than 4 hours, then Qantas is required to deduct at least 4 hours pay. If it's less than 4 hours, a portion of your pay gets deducted as well. Now, it's proportionate, but, then you're left with a situation where a percentage of your pilots might have been willing to take industrial action up to a certain point, but then, we've all got mortgages to pay. We've all got expenses. And so potentially you're left with a situation where over time, less and less pilots are willing to engage in that industrial action. And again, of course, your bargaining power has just disappeared if that happens.
If the vote came back no and we decided very hastily, or not hastily, but speedily to take industrial action over Christmas, would that be a reality? Do you think anyone would approve it, allow us to stop work over the busy holiday period, Matt?
Well, I think the powers of the Commission will be increased effectively. So, the Fair Work Commission can make orders to suspend or terminate industrial action under certain circumstances. And those circumstances are relevantly, there's a range of them, but relevantly, those circumstances are where the action is causing or threatening to cause significant economic harm. And if we attempt to shut down, effectively shut down the majority of aviation in Australia over that Christmas period, then there's more likelihood that the Fair Work Commission will issue an order. I think also that there's something out there in the public that, a lot of the public aren't real happy with Qantas at the moment. But
Yep.
also, if pilots, interrupt people's Christmas plans, etc., we will get a lot of attention from people in the society who, perhaps aren't supportive of unions or aren't supportive of workers anyway, and we've just given them the reason why they will be able to, subject us to, ridicule effectively for trying to
Yep.
ruin. We'd be Grinch for trying to ruin everyone's Christmas.
Yep. You've been heavily involved from day one in the agreement, Matt. So is it fair to say this is our long haul agreement's 270 pages long. So this is another incremental gain. I mean, we've gained as much as we could in a lot of areas, but some things we've just had to take what we could, the increment, bank that,
The
and
way
next EA will be good too.
Yeah, I mean that long haul agreement. I've been doing enterprise bargaining for unions for decades, and that long haul enterprise agreement is about as long as they come. Right, it's about as thick as they come, and the way that you get it that way is through incremental improvements. And when you look at the long haul agreement, you literally can tell which haul you're talking about by the thickness. It goes in order:
Yep.
long haul, short haul, Jetstar, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
down it goes all the way, right? And so one thing that people sometimes perhaps miss or are not aware of is that until you reach an agreement, you get nothing. The only way to improve workers' wages and conditions is to reach agreement. So you've got to reach agreement, So it's
Mm.
one thing to stand back and say, well, we might want to do this or we might want to do that, which is fair enough. I get it. People are allowed to have their view. But as long as everyone understands that at some point, in order to get the benefits that go into that 250, 300 page document, you've got to reach agreement. It's just about what's required to reach an agreement. What
Yep.
is it? What's the minimum, incremental improvements that are required, which we talk about all the time, for 50 plus one pilots to vote for it?
Do you think the opposition, or as in Qantas, is any more or less trustworthy than any other employer? Because I hear all the time, "Oh, you can't trust them. I don't believe a word they say." Is it just typical, or have we become more sceptical than most employees? Do you think, Matt?
I've got to say, I've worked for unions for part of my career, but corporations for the longest part of my career. And corporations, they make rational decisions in their own interest.
Yep.
I don't think they set out to hurt anyone or to do things. They will make rational decisions in their own best interest. So does that mean they can be trusted? Maybe, maybe not, right? But
Yep.
they don't make decisions that are going to cost them money. They won't, do a certain thing to hurt pilots, even if it means that it's going to cost them money. They won't do that. They will
Yep.
always act to, ultimately, and their obligations under the Corporations Act are to act in a way that is going to benefit shareholders, and that means profits. So they will always act in their own self-interest to produce as much profit as possible.
Do you think they're under the same pressure? Well, they're keen to get an agreement, aren't they? Like, the company's not trying to push this into the next year or the year after or 3 years' time. They would prefer this was just done and dusted. The deal was put on the table, and it's now up to us to decide whether or not it's acceptable.
100%, they are committed to this agreement. That is clear. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And why? Because businesses just want certainty. They want to be able
Yeah.
to do their forecasting, and they just want to be able to say, this is the forecast for the next 3 years or 4 years. Come and buy our shares, right? Because we're going to be profitable. And that desire to have certainty increases when your company's highly profitable. The last thing shareholders want to do is see a period of high profits disrupted by having uncertainty in relation to their labour.
Yep.
So absolutely, Qantas want to reach an agreement, and they want to do that so that they can give their shareholders included, and continue to be what is a highly profitable company.
So we've spoken about a yes scenario, how the timeline is tight, but that's done for a reason because every day we don't get it certified, the money doesn't start flowing to our pay packets. Yes, it's a time type schedule, but that's very deliberate. We've spoken about if it's a no case in some of the variables, if it comes back into the room to some renegotiation, we have some options. We could use the threat of PIA to try and strengthen our position, but we spoke about, the downsides to that as well. That does cost us money, and there's no guarantees the action will be approved or it'll work. In fact, we've got EFA currently taking industrial action, and the company just hasn't seemed to move at all, have they? They've been very resolute in their opposition to that.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about the process. If it got driven to IBD, there'd be some mediation in, I guess, a bit like a family court, is it, where all parties get together and try and come to an agreement of some description? But is that binding, Matt? Do we all have to attend that? Does everyone have to go? Or
You have to attend, but you don't have to
okay,
agree. You know,
okay,
so you can literally turn up and talk nice, and same with Qantas, they can turn
yeah,
up and talk nice, and you're not compelled to agree to anything. So it's unlikely. I think in this situation, it's unlikely that an agreement would be reached between AIPA and Qantas just because of conciliation.
okay. And then if we ended up in the commission with IBD, everything's off the table again, Matthew. Do you think they would withdraw everything they offered originally?
It's not quite. So the Fair Work Commission has an obligation to determine what the agreed items are.
Yep.
And so it sort of, the Fair Work Commission tries to narrow the differences, if you like. And so some items will be determined to be agreed. I won't bore everyone with how that process is determined, but some items will be determined to be agreed, but the Fair Work Commission will arbitrate on any non-agreed items and on wages. Wages is always arbitrated. Wages can't be an agreed item. That's always arbitrated. And
Oh,
then
really?
various other conditions will be arbitrated as well.
So the wages one, that's really interesting. So we would claim, we had a 25 to 35% offer, and Qantas would go back and say, well, our wages policy is 0033, and we're very comfortable in that position. We'd support that.
I could almost guarantee you that would be the Qantas position if we end
Okay.
up in
Yeah.
IBD.
So it's certainly not
0333.
without risk, is it?
Yeah.
Certainly not without risk. Yeah.
And
Look,
that's
I think,
why the
Matt,
Fair Work Commission tends to come down in the middle, right? Because Qantas definitely
okay.
will say 00333 and we'll say,
Yes.
I don't know, 8%
Yeah.
per annum, for over backdated and 4 years. And then the Fair Work Commission goes, thank you, everyone, and then cuts it down the middle.
Okay. And I've been involved in employer actions in the past. I got locked out when I was in London. So we spoke about some of the options for pilots to take or the union to take. What about Qantas? Can they take actions against us if we threaten them with our actions?
Yeah, look, absolutely. There's a range of actions that are available to the employer, Qantas. First of all, is that they can dock pay, right? If we engage in any industrial action, they're required to dock pay under the legislation. The second thing, of course, is that they can engage in a lockout. And of course, if we get locked out, then we don't get paid for that period either. They can stand down other workers. So obviously, if we're on industrial action, we're engaged in industrial action, but they could stand down, baggage handlers. They could stand down short haul pilots. They could stand down a range of other workers, which then applies pressure,
Flight attendants.
obviously, to us. Yeah, flight attendants. That's right, exactly. So absolutely, they can take that action. We see that, they've previously they've taken action of terminating people, making people redundant. But look, I think that's pretty unlikely, given that the federal court was so damning in relation to Qantas's actions in relation to baggage handler and found that Qantas acted unlawfully. I think it's unlikely that they would engage in that action again. But there are a range of actions available to them. I've been involved in industrial disputes where, Qantas or the employer, sorry, it's not Qantas, employer is taking action. And half my job is people ringing me saying, can they do this? Can they do this? Can they do this? And ultimately, Qantas will take whatever action they can lawfully to try and convince us that we need to go back to work.
Okay.
and it won't be enjoyable.
And would you care to give some advice on this unprotected action? So we just continue to do what we've always done. That's the best advice at the moment, isn't it? We're just working as we normally work. The custom and practice, how we've always done it, we just continue to do that.
Yeah, look, it's safe to say we want a clear message to members. Um, AIPA and pilots do not want to engage in unprotected industrial action. The
Perfect.
definition of industrial action is to change the way work is performed. And that definition is on purpose because it means that any change that we might engage in can be unprotected industrial action. So we want to send a clear message to people. There's no way that it can be done. There's no way that it should be done. We don't support unprotected industrial action.
Is there any value in taking legal advice from online forums? So pilot forums giving their expert opinion on, I'm an expert, I know what I'm doing, listen to me. I know the answer
Look, we
to that.
love a bush lawyer.
Yeah,
Speak to every lawyer. We love
absolutely.
bush lawyers. No, look, I think the legal team's here, so just call us, send an email. Maddie, Vaz, who's been involved in the long haul bargaining negotiations, lawyer, is here. She receives every call or every email, and she triages it out to pilots if necessary, or legal if that's where it lays. And we'll come back to you. We'll also use your questions to communicate it back out to pilots, because if you're asking the question, then other pilots want to know the answer to that question. So absolutely, just call us, and we're more than happy to provide advice.
So what we're doing, so obviously members at aipa.org.au is the best email address that comes into our central system. It's then allocated to the expert. Via our AIPA website, we also have a long haul EA portal, which is where you'll be watching this, where there's plenty of other content to get yourself informed. This is all about information. But as Matt said, we are the experts, as in AIPA's the experts. They will provide you timely and correct legal advice. Please don't take your advice from some online forum, because that makes Matthew's job very difficult to then protect you when you've done something silly. So come to the experts to start with, would be my bush lawyer advice. Is that okay, Matt?
That's right. Right on.
Lovely. Look, I think it's we could sit here and talk for hours and hours and hours, to be honest, Matt, but I just want to get to some key points so people understood the positives and the negatives. This is a position and a process which we are an expert in it now, Matt. You followed the network one closely, clean away. We know exactly what's coming, so we're prepared for that. Obviously, if that's how the pilots decide and that's where we end up, that's where we end up. But we're certainly trying to educate people to realise there's risk if we vote no. The risk of voting yes is we just get on with it, get paid, and we build on our incremental EA as we move forward. So we now ask the pilots to get educated and vote accordingly, and vote well with your one vote, please. So, Matt, thank you for your time. I know you're busy. I would prefer you get back to drafting because everyone needs that done. But, of course, thank you for joining us through the Stick With It. We had Matt Warburton, Head of Legal for AIPA. It's been a great pleasure having you with us, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thanks, huh? See you, mate.